Hardware issues in Linux. Hardware is underlying everything that we do on the computer. Hard disks, network cards, main memory, and peripherals work continuously without very much direct intervention from the user. In this video, we'll talk about adding and configuring new hardware for your Linux system, and we'll also talk about kernel modules and the role that they play in adding and configuring hardware for your system. So let's get started. Let's start with a discussion of hardware drivers and where they are in your system and where you can get new ones if you have some new piece of hardware that you want to install in your Linux system. The first place is actually in the Linux kernel. A lot of hardware drivers are already in the Linux kernel. Either they're there compiled directly into the kernel for the most common hardware devices, or they're add-ons to the kernel via kernel modules. And we'll talk about kernel modules in a few minutes here. And another place to get drivers is actually from the manufacturer of the hardware device themselves. A lot of hardware manufacturers these days are distributing Linux device drivers with their products because they know Linux is growing in popularity and they don't want to alienate themselves from a segment of the market. Okay, so they're actually distributing Linux device drivers with their products. And there's a bunch of special development projects out there. A couple of them that I want to note, it's not that the hardware is all that special, it's just that it's been notoriously difficult to hook up to Linux systems in the past. And Scanners is right at the top of that list. If you go to mostang.com/sane, you'll read about the SANE project. And SANE just stands for Scanner Access Now Easy. Okay, you got to love the acronym. And the SANE project is just working, they're devoted to scanners. And like I said, scanners have been a notoriously difficult thing to hook up to your Linux machine, and so if you've got a scanner, you have to check out SANE to get it up and running a lot easier than in the past. And then USB devices are another specialized sort of hardware device. All sorts of things can be USB devices these days. Keyboards, mouse, graphics tablets, zip disks, all sorts of things can be USB devices these days. And USB has really gained in popularity for a lot of reasons. It's a fast connection. USB devices are also hot swappable, which means you can unplug a USB device from your computer, you can plug a different one in, and everything will just work fine. You don't have to reboot your computer just to get it to recognize that new piece of hardware you plugged in, like you have to with other sorts of ports on your computer. USB ports are special that way. And you can find all about find out all about the Linux USB project at linux-usb.org. And this will have all sorts of information about various USB devices and hooking them up to your Linux system. To add hardware to your computer, the first step that you have to take is to physically connect the hardware to your computer. All right, this might seem obvious enough, but there's a lot of details to deal with this. Let's talk about some of those details, and we'll come back to this slide later. So to physically connect the device, there's basically three kinds of devices that you're going to connect to your computer. One is an external device, something that's completely external to the computer. It's outside of the case altogether. All right, it probably plugs into the back of the computer. Maybe it also plugs into the wall for power. And once you do that, then you're good to go. If I show you the picture of a back of a PC, an external device is going to plug into one of these slots back here and possibly also plug into the wall for power, and then you'll be good to go. When you install an external device, the computer should probably be shut down. You install the external device, and then you boot it up, and then the external device will be recognized when the system boots up. Okay, so that's the basics of installing external devices. They'll be very simple. And then internal devices and expansion cards, you do have to go inside the case of the computer to install these. And so they're a little bit trickier because you're dealing with sensitive electronics in there, so you have to know what you're doing. Sometimes if you've never done this before, it seems kind of intimidating, but it's actually pretty simple to install internal devices and expansion cards. Let me show you the picture of a motherboard, and that'll make this process a little bit easier for you. So here's a basic motherboard. Your motherboard might look a little bit differently. The things might be arranged a little bit different. They could be horizontal instead of vertical, or vertical instead of horizontal, and they might just be laid out differently. But you can tell by the shape of things what they are. These long, skinny things here are ISA slots. Okay, these right here are PCI slots. These two things right here are slots for IDE disk drives. This slot right here is for a floppy disk drive. These slots down here are for memory cards. Okay, and basically anything that you're going to deal with plugging into your computer is probably going to plug into one of these slots that I just showed you. All right, and when you're in here, you have to be careful of two things. Once, anytime you're in here, you have to make sure the power's off to your computer. It should be shut down. The power should be off. I'd even unplug it from the wall just as an extra level of safety. And then this right here is where the power is going to be given to the motherboard. It's going to come in through there. And basically anything that's connected to here, don't touch. look for where the main wires for this go, and it's going to be connected to the power supply for the computer. Don't touch that. Don't touch anything that's connected to that power supply. That's how you'll prevent yourself from being shocked and potentially being hurt. Okay, so don't touch any of that stuff. The other thing you have to worry about when you're inside the computer touching any of this sensitive electrical stuff is that you don't shock it. All right, just like little charges that you build up from shuffling your feet across a carpeted floor actually could end up shocking one of these boards and damaging one of those boards. So anytime you work on one of these boards in here, installing a new board or removing some old board or whatever, any work that you do inside of there, you should be wearing one of these wrist straps. It's called an ESD wrist strap, and ESD just stands for electrostatic discharge. Now this wrist strap, this goes around your wrist obviously enough, and then this wire connects, I think this is an alligator clip right here, and you should just connect that to something big in metal if you have an alligator clip. Some of the wrist straps have like a little plug on it that would go into the negative or the ground plug of like a 3-prong outlet. So if you have that 3-prong outlet where it's like this and then that, some of them have a plug on there that plugs into the round part up top that's like the ground. Okay, so whatever your wrist strap has, make sure it's grounded. Attach it to some big metal desk if you have a metal desk, and make sure like the paint's scraped off if you've got one of these alligator clips, so that you have a good connection, so that you're well grounded. And then any static charge that you've built up is discharged through this wrist strap, to that big metal desk that won't even feel the charge, as opposed to some card in your computer that would really feel that charge. Even though it's a really small charge, these things are very sensitive electronic equipment, and they could be damaged by just the smallest shock. Okay, so make sure you're always wearing your wrist strap when you're dealing with that stuff. Now what I want to do is show you some cards plugged into this motherboard. And what the first picture I'm going to show you is 2 network interface cards plugged into this motherboard. One's going to be plugged into this top ISA slot, and one's going to be plugged into this top PCI slot. All right. Now, the picture is going to be from a slightly different angle, but you should be able to recognize that it's the exact same motherboard here. So here's the 2 network interface cards plugged into the motherboard. And you can see this one's plugged into the PCI slot, this one's plugged into the ISA slot. And then this space right here on both of these cards is going to be on the back of your computer. This is going to be accessible by just plugging something into the back of the computer. This jack right here is called an RJ45 jack. It looks like a telephone jack, but it's a little bit fatter, a little bit wider, a little bit thicker, whatever you want to say, and it's just got more pins in it. And this jack, this RJ45 jack, that's like what you'd hook up to go onto the Ethernet or something. Okay, so that's the 2 network interface cards plugged into here with that RJ45 jack accessible. When this motherboard goes back into the computer, right now it's obviously out of the computer, when it goes back in, there'll be like little screws where you can attach these things to the case so that they don't wobble around. You don't want them to be able to shake or be moved when somebody plugs something in. You want them to stay solid because you don't want to damage this slot down here that they're plugged into. Okay. Now the next picture that I show you will be a hard disk plugged into one of these IDE slots. Okay. Now that is going to look a little bit different because the hard disk has this ribbon cable that attaches it to here. Okay. The network interface cards plug directly into the slots. They didn't have any ribbons. They just plugged right in there. The hard disk is going to sit a little distance away from the motherboard, and so it's got this ribbon cable to attach it to the motherboard. Now this is a 40-pin ribbon cable. All right, and that 40-pin ribbon cable, on this side of it right here, if you look carefully, it's got a red stripe on it. If the ribbon cable was right in front of you, that would stand out clear as day. It just doesn't stand out so much in this picture. But that red stripe is very significant for determining which way to plug this ribbon cable into the slot on the motherboard. The red stripe signifies the pin 1 end of this 40-pin cable. All right, and the pin 1 end of the 40-pin cable, there's also a marking on the actual slot itself that shows where to plug that in, what pin 1 end should be, and then you can plug it in correctly. If that red stripe wasn't there, you wouldn't know which way to plug this thing in because you can actually flip it around 180 degrees and still plug it in. The disk won't operate correctly, but you wouldn't know that. So that's why that red stripe is there to tell you which side is the correct side to plug in. All right, so that's the basics of connecting, physically connecting hardware. Now let's look at some of those other issues. So once you've physically connected the device to your computer, the next step I have listed here is to set jumpers on the card or the device. Now perhaps this is outdated and I'm showing my age. Perhaps I'd rather think of it as showing my experience. Okay, so the jumpers, I've typically seen these on older ISA cards. So if you're installing an older ISA card into your computer, you might see one of these things. And there's jumpers in other places on your computer as well, like on your motherboard. If you want to overclock your processor, typically you hook up a jumper to do that. Now